theme was the first time. And I told about the first time I got married, which, by the way, was the only time. I left the story hanging with a small family impromptu reception at my new bride's house. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about our wedding night. We left home. This was before the days of interstates. And I was stationed in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I was 300 miles out of pass limit. So I had to be back. This was Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock. And I had to be back in school at 6 o'clock Monday morning. The word freedom popped up. Freedom! How about that? Finally, the freedom to do what we've been wanting to do for 2 years. We left her house in my cousin's car that had been properly decorated, and we had our car hid out in Marietta. We swapped cars, had all our worldly possessions in the back of a '57 Ford, and away we went. I wanted to stop in Marietta. I'd waited long enough. But cooler heads prevailed, and we compromised. And that's the secret to a happy marriage, is compromising. Whatever she says, I agree with. We decided we would go until the sun went down and find a place to stay. Now, there were not motel chains at intersections like they are now. Like I said, there was no interstates, it was all back roads. We get to Alexander City, Alabama, the garden spot of northeastern Alabama. And we ride around for a minute and we spot this motel that looks pretty good, the Horseshoe Bend Hotel. Now I go in to register, and I'm totally green at this. I don't even know how to fill out the registration card. This was before computers, you had to fill it out. The desk clerk kindly helped me fill it out, and this ring was just sparkling, so I knew he knew. I signed in as Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Kemp, address Keesler Air Force Base, Mississippi. He looked me straight in the eye and he says, "You gonna need the room all night?" Needless to say, it was not a 4-star hotel. We got all checked in and unloaded and whatnot, and decided that we had better go eat supper before we began the night's activities. I remember I had a steak. I figured I was going to need all the strength I could get. We get back to the room, and the usual wedding night festivities began. Now, when we'd first gone in, we'd noticed that the air conditioner was blowing wide open. It was June, it was hot. Didn't think too much about it, had other things on my mind. We get back from supper, and I won't say I was excited or nervous or anything, but I used her toothbrush instead of mine. The usual wedding night activities took place, and we finally decided we better get a little sleep because we had to leave early the next morning. Needless to say, we slept close that night. Not out of passion, but out of the attempt at staying warm. She came out of the bathroom and I complimented her on her blue gown. She informed me she did not have on a blue gown. She was cold. That air conditioner's still blowing. So me being the bright individual I am, I start trying to find the thermostat. I turned that room upside down. I looked behind everything. I looked everywhere. I could not find it. And to this day, I don't know why, I was too embarrassed to pick up the phone, call the desk clerk, and ask him where the thermostat was. But I didn't do it. We got up the next morning. You could have hung meat in there. The windows were frosted up. It was cold. Now I sleep on my stomach. I raised up and looked, and lo and behold, right above the headboard was a little gray box that said thermostat. I opened it up and immediately turned on the heat. We celebrated our freedom one more time, and then decided to go have breakfast. I had steak and eggs. We check out and we head off to Mississippi. And the rest of the story is history, and it's been going on for 53 years. But we still celebrate our freedom every chance we get, and I can.
The name of my story is The Summer of Freedom. To enjoy the Summer of Freedom, I want you to come back with me to 1964, to my little hometown of Marion, South Carolina. Population then just a little under 3,000. Now we had one traffic light in Marion, South Carolina. We didn't need it except for on the weekends when the folks from Virginia and North Carolina would come through their way going to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. To say it was a small town is an understatement. But we didn't live in the metropolis of Marion. We lived in West Marion, 4 miles out. My closest neighbor was 2 miles away, and the only way we knew them is we shared a party line with them. Now in 1964, I was 9 years old at the start of the summer. But boy was I excited, because in August I was going to be 10 years old. And I could not wait to get to double digits. I knew from going from single digits to that double digit, I would be freer than I've ever been before, and life would be whole and meaningful. Now also, in 1964, every Saturday my daddy would go to town. And he'd take one of us 5 children every week. Well, on this particular June, it was my turn to go to town with Daddy. Now, Daddy had business in Bridges Drugstore, and rather than go inside the store, I decided I'd sit outside on the curb and watch the beach traffic go by. And that's when it happened. I saw the first 1964 red convertible Ford Mustang. It was the prettiest thing I've ever seen. It had the sleek tires, it had the curves, and it had its top down. And I knew if I could ever own a Ford Mustang, that I'd know what freedom was all about, and life would be whole and worthwhile. Now also in 1964, the single biggest event in my day was the 2:30 p.m. CNS train that came by my house every day. Every day at 2:30, I'd be at the end of my dirt road waiting on the CNS train. And every day it'd be the same way. Here comes the train. I'd wait for the conductor, and then I'd wave to the conductor, and then I'd count those cars as they came by. And here comes the caboose, and I'd wave to the guy in the caboose. Well, June the 8th, 1964, I thought was just another day. It was hot, just like every other day. It was humid, just like every day. And at 2:30, I was at the end of my dirt road waiting on the 2:30 CNS railroad. And here he comes. And I'm waving to the conductor, but this time the conductor doesn't wave. He reaches out of the cab of the train, and he throws a brown paper bag right at me. Now, from my house to the road was about 200 yards. You had West Marion Highway, then you had a ditch, and then you had the railroad. Well, he threw that bag so that it landed right in the middle of that ditch. Now, in the ditches in South Carolina, we have blackberry bushes, but we called them briars back then. But without hesitation, I went into the briar patch. I quickly found out I was no Brer Rabbit because the briars grabbed both of my arms and both of my legs. But undeterred, I went on into the briars. And I got to that brown paper bag and I opened it up, and there was a treasure inside. There was 3 Tootsie Roll Pops, a juicy fruit box of juicy fruit gum, and a full-size Snicker bar. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Well, you can bet the house that next day at 2 o'clock, I was at the end of the road waiting on the 2:30 CNS train. And here he comes. And the conductor is just waving like this, and I'm waving like that, and he just goes on by. He didn't throw a bag that day. Sporadically throughout the summer, though, he would throw bags. There was no rhyme or reason as to why he would throw the bag. But August the 29th, 1964, the last brown bag was tossed out of the cab, and there was a note inside, and it said, "This is my final run. After 40 years with the train, I'm retired. But I can tell you, this summer has a great way to enter my career with seeing you every day smiling and waving like you knew me." He said, "God bless you, little buddy." So I take 3 things back from the summer of '64. The first is, no matter what your age, the next year is not going to make you any freer. 9 is the same as 10, and 59 is the same as 60. The second thing is, owning a Ford Mustang will not make you any freer. I owned one in 1989, sold it after 6 months because I couldn't get in and out of it very easily. And the last thing I learned is that little acts of kindness are very much appreciated. And if you're lucky, it will set your spirit free. Be kind, be nice, and wave like you mean it.
My name's Alan Schlack, and I was born and raised in Charleston. Not that Charleston, the other one, Charleston, West Virginia. Almost heaven and country roads. And when I was a small child, I didn't understand the importance of freedom until this one story came to me by way of my father. And I'm going to tell it to you today. When I was very young, we didn't go to a doctor because my dad, Bernie, ran the corner drugstore. And they weren't pharmacies, they were drugstores back then. And across the street from his drugstore on the west side of Charleston were nondescript buildings, a hobby store, an Army, Navy, a clothing store, and a hospital, and then an auto parts store. And the hospital would have fit into this room. It was small. And it was brown brick and had a door that said Stats Hospital. And Dwight and Charles Stats were 2 excellent physicians that ran this hospital. And they had a staff physician named Harry Cobliner. And that was my doctor. And Harry Cobliner had a thick German accent, beautiful silver hair and sparkling blue eyes. And he was a very nice man, and we would see him occasionally at the synagogue, and he would sit by himself because he didn't speak much English. But my father, having grown up in Cincinnati, spoke a little German, and so he became his friend. It was a kind of friendship that only you could have in West Virginia, where your neighbors are your friends. And I didn't know much about Dr. Cobliner, except he was a very nice man, and he had no family. He lived in a rooming house on the east side of Charleston. He didn't own a car, so he usually took the bus to work. And he died in 1962. And I didn't really understand much of that until my grandfather died in 1968, and we went to the funeral. And in the old Jewish cemetery in Charleston, West Virginia, after the ceremony, my father, rather than leave, walked to the far corner of the cemetery, to the very last row, to the very last grave, and we stood there for a few moments, because there was the headstone of Dr. Harry Cobliner. And the saddest thing my father has ever said to me is the words he said that day. He said he was alone in life, and here he is alone in death, because he'd lost his entire family. He'd left Germany in 1942, arriving in New York in June of 1942, and found his way to Charleston. And I didn't understand the whole story until the ride home from the cemetery that day. I asked Dad, "What about Dr. Cobliner? I really don't know anything about him." And Dad said, it's a great story. He said, when he died, I went to his rooming house to clean it out. He owned 2 suits, a few pairs of pants, 2 pairs of shoes. He owned a scientific textbook, an electric blanket, and a few other things. And so Dad wasn't sure what to do with these things until he found in the sock drawer an envelope with a key. And he thought, what could this key be to? So he went to the family lawyer, Joe Blagg, and Joe said, yeah, I did his will. I know what that is. That's a safety deposit box key. We're going to have to probate his estate. So Dad advanced some money, and they probated the estate, and they went to the various banks throughout Charleston, and they found the bank that the key belonged to, Charleston National Bank. And they opened the safety deposit box. And what do you think they would find? Perhaps some jewels or family heirlooms that he was able to somehow get out of Nazi Germany? Some keepsake of his family, perhaps? No, they found $114,000 in United States savings bonds. He'd been buying bonds from the day he reached America. And there was a note in with the savings bonds that he wanted to invest in freedom, that his liberty in the United States was the most important thing in the world, and that without a strong America, that freedom could not live. And so he'd been buying these week after week after week until in today's value, it's worth about $500,000. And that is the story of Dr. Harry Cobliner from Charleston, West Virginia. And if you want to see the probate records, I brought the copies that I made when I was in Charleston 15 years ago to confirm my dad's story. Thank you.
I have always dreamt that I could fly. I could just spread my arms out and leap into space in my dreams, and I could fly over meadows filled with flowers. I could see cows grazing. I could go over the trees, and I could go around the trees, and I could just have a wonderful time. And if I were indoors, I could leap the stairs in one jump like Superman. I could fly, and I never wanted to wake up, but I did. Just before my 75th birthday, I happened to notice an article in the paper about tandem skydiving. And I thought, maybe if I did a skydive, it would feel like I was flying. And I could really get that sensation. So I cut the article out of the paper, and then I thought, I better talk it over with my dear husband. So I cooked a good dinner that night, and during dinner, I broached the subject, and I handed him the article. He perused the article and looked at me, and the first words he said was, "You're too fat. The instructor won't be able to get his arms around you, and he might drop you." And I thought, well, if that's his only objection, that would be easily solved. So I rejoined Weight Watchers. And during the winter, I lost the offending poundage. Because it said in the article that they would not take newbies up until the air temperature was in the 70s. And so I thought I would have enough time. And he also stipulated that I had to pay for it myself, because he was not going to spend his hard-earned money for anything as suicidal as skydiving. And I said, all right, I'll take it out of the household account. I called the skydiving center in Cedartown and made my appointment for a Sunday afternoon in July. I belonged to a dulcimer group at that time, and we met on Sunday afternoon, so I told my friends in the dulcimer group that I was going to skydive. And I said, would you like to come and watch me? And they said, yes, we'll bring our dulcimers and we'll play falling leaves as you come down from the sky. Bill gathered my insurance policies out of the safe deposit box so that he could clutch them to his chest while I was falling. The day arrived. It was a rainy, cloudy Sunday morning. And I was rather disappointed, but I thought, oh, it will clear and all will be fine. And we drove west towards Cedartown as I prayed for the sun to come out. And Bill prayed to counteract my prayers. But the gods were with me. The sun came out and it cleared up. The only difficulty was that the rain left rather a muddy field for the landing area. But we got there and I signed up and I met my partner. Oh, his name was Adam, which was a very good sign. He was about 30 years old, 6'2", and had been 1,000 times on skydives. And so I felt safe, and it was very comfortable that close to him. My husband was about this tall, and this fellow was really nice. So anyhow, he gave me instructions, and I was so excited that I really didn't listen to very many of the instructions. I got all harnessed up, and they showed me a film, and then I signed my life away, all the papers, and fortunately, poor Bill, he got very pale. He was pale to begin with, but he was really white by that time. And fortunately, my dulcimer group showed up so that they could keep him company while I got on the plane. We were the first ones getting on because we were going to be the last ones getting off. This plane filled up. There was a whole crowd of people. Some were diving, taking their independent dives, and others were tandem. And when it got to the first plateau of height, the others all left because I had paid more to go higher. We went on and on and on up, and finally Adam said, "Get in the doorway." He got me kneeling in the doorway, and we were there, and I made the mistake of looking down. It was a moment of absolute sheer terror, and I thought, what the hell have I gotten myself into? And all of a sudden I heard 1, 2, 3, and he pushed me out. Oh, freedom, freedom. Those 90 seconds were the most glorious time of my entire 75 years. It was wonderful. I cast off the surly bonds of earth, and I flew.
Have you ever had an Uzi, a submachine gun pointed straight at you? Well, if that happens to you, you'll wonder how you're going to get out of this. And this happened to me and my husband. We went on a dream vacation, landed in Cairo, Egypt, got off the airplane on the tarmac, and as we unloaded from the plane, they checked our passport, our ticket, and said, "Go." And with that, a man with an Uzi held the gun against us and marched us into the building. We couldn't believe it. I said, "You can't do this. You can't do this. We're from the USA." "Go." But I'm from the USA. "Go." So we went. I mean, who would hesitate if somebody had a gun like that aimed at them? Well, we went inside the building, and they talked to us for a little bit in a language we didn't understand, and then took us in an elevator. Took us upstairs and down the hallway. All the way, there were doors open here and doors open there and dark eyes peering at us. We got to the end of the hallway and the guard with the gun opened the door, took us in. It was a mustard-colored room, no windows, and a hole in the floor for a bathroom. There were 2 cots. My husband said, "What did we do?" And I said, "I don't know. The door locked." And after a little while, he said, "You know, I can't hear very well. You go knock on the door and see what they're going to see, what you can get them to talk to you." We didn't have our luggage. We didn't have our ticket. We didn't have anything. We did not have any freedom to do anything. We were in a foreign country. Well, when I knocked on the door, the guard opened the door, and I started talking to him and jabbering as fast as I could and trying to confuse him, and he just slammed the door and locked it again. So my husband and I laid on that cot, side by side, and I said, "What if we get fleas?" He said, "Who cares about fleas? Let's get out of here. What did we do?" I said, "I don't know." And then he said, looked at his watch and he said, "Okay, go drive him crazy." So I knocked on the door again and started jumping up and down, and I said, "I want to see that man down there, the man down at the head desk." So he locked my husband in the room and took me down there, and I said, "I need to go to the bathroom, and I don't like that hole in the floor." So he took me to a place where I could go to the bathroom, and with that I sneaked out and went to the main part where I could see a telephone. And I asked somebody if they knew how to use the international phone, and I went over and paid for a coin to put in the slot. And I called my son up, and I said, "Well, Dad and I are under arrest. I don't know whether they want a ransom. I don't know what's going on. But we're under arrest in Cairo, and we'll never get home. If we're not on that airplane in the morning, you come and find us." He said, "Okay, Mom, okay." And then I said, "Don't hang up. Wait till you use up all the money." So we talked a little bit more. Then I went upstairs and I said to my husband, "I've got a call through to the U.S. Pretty soon they came and brought us some soup, a cold bowl of soup, and some crackers. We figured we were there for a long time. Well, I kept complaining and jumping up and down and saying, we're from the USA. We airpit, USA, USA. We were in there for 10 hours, captured. And I said to my husband, if we're ever free, if we ever get home again, I'm never, ever leaving our country again. We'd be so lucky if we could just get home. And we did get home. When we got home, I got down and kissed the ground and I said, the USA, this is the best place to live. But you know what? We went on another trip 6 months later, but not back to Egypt.
My story about freedom is heartfelt. It was told to me by my brother-in-law, who is a Navy chief. And as we all know, freedom is not free. There's always a price to be paid. And about 13 years ago, he was a sailor, a blue water sailor. He was on the USS Enterprise, one of the most magnificent ships ever built. If you've ever seen it, you've seen one of those big Navy aircraft carriers that are like that, you understand what big really means. I mean, it would even impress a Texan. And he was in the Mediterranean, and they had been tied up. Actually, it might have been just outside the Mediterranean because they were in a Spanish port, is what I'm trying to say. I believe it might have been Cadiz, perhaps Gibraltar, I don't know. But it was our last night in port. And a fellow native ship was in port also. This was a German cruiser. West Germany, of course. But it's all Germany now. By the by, they decided that the Germans invited the officers to come aboard for a celebration, for comradeship, swap lives, and toast one another. And as the custom, the Navy chiefs aboard the Enterprise invited the German chiefs to come and celebrate with them. And in this way, the bonds of comradeship are sealed, and as fellow allies on the ocean, it's good to get to know how your fellow seamen are getting along. It breaks the monotony of those long hours at sea, those long days at sea. And they were glad to be leaving this port because the next day they got ready to prepare to shove off because they were going back home. They were going back to New York City to see family they hadn't seen for 9 months. 9-month cruise, that's a long time. So off they went. They left port September 9th, 2001. 2 days out, they got the news. Someone had paid the price of freedom. You never know when the call or the debt will come due, and you have no choice but to answer. And 3,000 Americans paid that price on September 11th. Now, those homesick sailors headed for New York did an immediate about face. They had new orders. Go to the Middle East. And so off they went. Being sailors, they knew how to take their orders. They knew how to put down those feelings of homesickness, and they did their duty. And early the next morning, they came down from the radar station, strange ship bearing down on us. Well, who could that be? Well, soon they identified the ship. It was that German ship, the one where they recently had such a great time. Gotten to know those men, gotten to swap drinks with them. And it became obvious as they continued on their course that the German cruiser had set up a course to intercept. And as they started to draw near, they came into sight. They kept coming, they kept coming. And by this time, anyone who wasn't on duty was looking out the port side to see just what was going on. And they came abreast of that carrier at a very slow speed. And all of the sailors in that crew were turned out in their dress uniforms on their port side, standing at attention. And as they came by, each man saluted as one as they passed by that carrier headed in the opposite direction, perhaps in harm's way. And as the ship stern passed by, it flew the American flag. Because on that day, everyone was an American. Thank you.
This summer, I went to a Boy Scout camp for my first time, for staying overnight for a week. And it was really my first time actually leaving to spend the night overnight at a camp. So I was a little nervous, but I thought it'd be fun. And it was my first year, so I only signed up for a few classes for Boy Scouts. And when I got there, it looked really fun. They had a huge lake with slides and stuff. They had games, they had all these cool classes. And so the only thing is we had to walk like a mile from where everything was to get to our tents. And they had pre-set up tents, so it was full of spiders. I'm not really fond of spiders, so it was a little scary. So I kind of just set my stuff up in the corner and hoped that nothing would crawl on it. And I had my own tent I brought just in case that reason. And I said, okay, during my free time today, I'll come and I'll set it up. So what I did was I went to my first class. We went swimming in the lake and we did our swim test, all that fun stuff. And then I had free time. I'm like, okay, I have a big amount of free time. I'll play around a little while since it's my first day, and then I'll go set up my tents. So I played around a little while. I'm like, okay, now I should go set up my tent, but let me play one more game. And then I said that again, and again, and again. And so it finally got to the time I stopped playing, and I realized, oh, I don't have any more free time. I have to go to my next class. So I go to my next class and then go straight to dinner. And I started kind of freaking out because I didn't want to sleep with all the spiders. And so I start freaking out because I can't set up my tent because after dinner we have to go on a 5-mile hike. And then we go on, but at dinner, one of the dads says, because a few of my other friends, they also forgot because we were all playing games together. And so one of the dads said he'd set up our tents for us because he was his son was almost done with Scouts, almost an Eagle, so he's done it more than several times. And so he set up our tents, and we got back, and it was much better sleeping without the spiders. But what I learned from that story was I had the free time and the freedom to do what I wanted, but also the freedom came with responsibility, and the responsibility I didn't do. Wow.
Of course, I grew up after the cute Scout kid. That's great. For the first 15 and a half years of my life, freedom was an abstract concept. I was born in 1955 here in Atlanta, and my parents, being, as you might have guessed, black, spent most of my early years informing me about freedom and how I had so many more freedoms than they did because they couldn't vote, they couldn't go here, they couldn't go there. I was free, but I had to go to bed. I was free, but I had to do this. I was free. So I didn't quite understand the concept of freedom, and it was like that. Until, like I said, until I became 16, and I think for most of us, I experienced what was the paragon of freedom. I was going to get my first car. Now, understand that I'm using the word car in a very broad term. I had a 1972 Chevy Vega. Yeah, if you don't remember the Vega, you remember that, yeah, some of you are nodding, and God bless you, and I'm so sorry. It was like a step up from a Hot Wheels car. It was, and honest to God, it was made out of plexiglass, and in the owner's manual, they said the good thing about the Vega is that small dents can be taken out with a hairdryer. So if you had a fender bender, you wouldn't call Allstate, you would call my mom, would come with boom. Now, when my dad gave me the car keys, he said this, I don't know, maybe it's just dad speak, and I am a dad now, and I'm sure I've said something equally as a name. He said, a car is not a toy. Okay, once again, this is a Chevy Vega, so we're not, technically you're correct. But so he made me promise I wouldn't do anything foolish with it. I wouldn't do anything. But you have to understand, being a 16-year-old, when you got a car, you are free. And so I was just going, I can go anywhere, I can do anything as long as my dad and mom don't find out about it. Now, one of my responsibilities was to drive to school, and I did. I took my little brother was 3 years younger than I am, and when we got to school, after having the car for a couple of months, I decided to play the game that you play when you are a big brother and you have a little brother. It's called, oh, I'm gonna almost pick you up in the car, but I'm gonna drive away. So we're in the parking lot. And so, and it's just like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My dad worked until 6 every day. The man got up, never missed a day of work. And so this is 3 o'clock, and my mom was a teacher, so I knew she was away. And so we're in the parking lot, and my brother came to get in the car, and he said, come on, George, get in the car. He said, okay, that's the sound of a Chevy Vega, I'm sorry. It just, that was the engine. You could hear it coming, muffler. And he came to the car, and he came and grabbed the door, and he was there screaming, it's not funny. And so finally I stopped, I put him in the car, and we drove home. We're laughing, man. I'm gonna tell Dad. I said, I'm gonna say you're lying. No. We get home, get through dinner, and my dad gets home about 7 o'clock, he walks in the house, and he says, give me your car keys. I said, yeah. What did I say about the car? The car is not a toy? Yeah, car is not a toy. You could have killed your brother. Now I'm freaking out. I'm going, oh my God. I didn't know about drone satellites at that point. I don't think we had them. And I couldn't. I said, Dad, what are you talking about? And I thought I can go for the bluff, and I couldn't. I said, no, Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. Playing in the parking lot with the car. You could have run over your brother and killed him. And I went, what? And he just pointed his finger, and he just walked away. I never misbehaved in that car again for the duration of having the car. And he never told me until a couple of years ago. I finally said, Dad, he was like 80-something, and he had a weak moment. I said, Dad, how'd you catch me? He said, yeah, I had to go to a doctor's appointment. I just happened to be going past the school parking lot. I saw you almost kill your brother. So I understood when the car was taken away from me, the value of freedom, because as my parents tried to tell me, you never understand and appreciate freedom until it's taken away from you. Thank you. freedom. When I thought about the topic, I thought about a lot of different things. I thought about kind of big global things, like freedom from oppression and tyranny and terrorism, like the people in Ukraine and Israel and Afghanistan are going through right now. I thought about the United States and the freedoms that we enjoy here, the freedom of speech that we enjoy tonight, the freedom of religion to worship the gods that we want to, our God that we want to worship anywhere, anytime. I think about the freedoms that we have in the state of Georgia, freedom of choice, the freedom to make our own laws in our state. And if you don't like the laws here, you can move to Colorado. And if you don't like what they're doing in Colorado, you can move to Georgia. And I like the freedoms that we enjoy here in Roswell. I like the freedoms that we have, the freedom to celebrate. And we do that a lot in Roswell. I like the freedoms that we have to use our public spaces. I had some friends in from California last week. We had a picnic, a company picnic at Don White Park on the river. What an awesome place. And they were just amazed at how beautiful it was. But freedom really impacts you when it's personal. So I began to think about my very first experience of freedom. And it came with a newspaper route when I was 10 years old. I remember that newspaper route as if it were yesterday. 83 families, 3.5 miles. It was a mile from my house and a mile back, so over 5 miles to deliver papers. But it wasn't the newspaper route that gave me the freedom. It was the bike that my dad bought me. Because prior to that time, I had what was called a spider bike with a banana seat. It was yellow with a purple banana seat. Had like 14-inch rims on it. And you could pedal and pedal and pedal and not really go very far. But it was fun when you're riding over the dirt mounds and stuff. My dad bought me this black Schwinn 26-inch 10-speed. And like many other things at that point in time, he bought it a little big so I'd grow into it. So when I got on that bike, I kind of had to stand on my tiptoes, if you know what I'm talking about, that big bar in the middle. And it was a little tough, so I had to lean the bike over to actually get on the bike. But man, when you pedal that bike, the faster you go, you can change the gears. And the more gears you could change, the faster that bike went. It was like a rocket. And I knew about rockets because I was from Huntsville. That's where I grew up. That's where the story's from. And that was Spacetown, USA. I was 4 when Kennedy said, let's go to the moon. So I grew up with rockets, and I had my very own rocket. So I had my rocket, my bicycle, and I had my newspaper route. And the very first day that I went on to deliver newspapers was November the 1st. I took over from the previous newspaper carrier. And it was cold in Huntsville. And as it was, the only real cold weather jacket I had was this brown corduroy thick jacket that came down just below my knees. So there I was, and it was on a Wednesday. Now if you're familiar with back in the day, the Wednesday paper and the Sunday paper had the coupons. So when you roll up those Wednesday papers, 83 of them, they barely fit in this big canvas bag that had a front pocket and a back pocket. So I had this giant coat on, one of those Russian fur hats, riding my bike for one of the first times I'd ever ridden it, and I had this big sack of papers on the front. So I ride the mile to the house, man, I'm huffing and puffing when I get to that first house, because riding a mile with a big, probably 100 pounds of papers was tough. Well, that very first house had a mailbox that was kind of low, and it had a newspaper container underneath it that you put the newspapers in. So there I was on this pretty main highway, and I leaned over to put that paper in that box, and I fell against the mailbox. And I had gotten the paper in the thing, but I couldn't get back up. My foot would not touch the ground. And so there I was, kind of flailing around on the side of this busy highway with a bunch of newspapers and this big jacket. Well, time went by, it seemed like hours, but I'm sure it was only about 5 minutes. And some man swerved across the lane of traffic and pulled up behind me and said, "Son, do you need help?" Well, I didn't know that, I don't remember saying anything, but I remember him coming and writing me up and getting me on my way. So that was my freedom. But you know, I recognize that freedom is not free, as we heard earlier. For me, the freedom was work. It was hard work. But the other side of that equation of work are the things that I learned. And I learned resourcefulness. I learned creativity. I learned to be independent, and things that have served me well to this day. Freedom is not free, and where we start is work.
Stage and like talk in front of people, so I'm kind of like freaking out. And since I'm 17, I don't have, you know, a whole bunch of super cool life stories about, you know, freedom and adventures and whatnot and stuff, and I know everyone else does. So just, you know, I just thought I would say something about freedom itself instead of like doing something. So, well, okay. So earlier today, I was with my mom and my brother. My brother's 15 and my mom is an adult. She is a young adult. And my brother said, "Man, I don't have any freedom. I'm only 15. I can't do anything." And my mom was like, "No, are you crazy? Are you kidding? Kids have so much freedom. You guys have all of it." And so then I started thinking like, well, who does have more freedom? Kids have more freedom or do adults? And so then I figured there were a couple different types of freedom, and I'm sure I'm not covering all of them, but just two that I could think of was freedom from and freedom to. And what I mean is that here in America we have like all the freedom ever, and it's great. And freedom from is like freedom from like oppression and freedom from fear of like, you know, we can generally walk around outside and not, you know, have to worry like, am I going to die if I leave this room, you know? And I think it's really great. And kids have freedom from responsibility. They have freedom from, you know, worrying about anything ever. They can just do whatever they want all the time. I'm sure it's fun. And since I'm only 17, I'm not an adult yet, and so I have all the kid freedoms from everything. But also, since I'm getting older, I'm starting to have freedom to. Like freedom to do what I want, freedom to drive around in my mom's car, which she kindly loans me. I have freedom to work if I want to at like McDonald's or whatever, and the freedom to go to the store and buy things. I have freedom to go to jail as an adult if I kill someone, because that's how the law works in Georgia. Which I'm not gonna. Don't worry, I won't. And so there's just so much freedom in this whole, like, this is just the greatest thing. Like, I'll just think every single day about how much freedom there is in my life and in this country. And I'm so grateful for it all the time. Like, you can do anything. You can be whoever you want. You can do whatever you want. And nothing is limiting anyone. And I don't feel limited. And I can just live with my family and be happy. And we can move if we want. We can stay here. And it's just so great. And I'm sorry I had to be the last person, but I just want to close with that I'm just so grateful for all the freedom that we have, and the freedom to come and do this as well, which was super great. And thank you.